Hello and welcome to my early game guide for Distant Worlds 2. I'm Icon and this video contains tips and tricks which will help you over the early phase of the game. The content of this video is tailored for beginners and intermediate players, so if you're already pretty experienced with this one, most of the things in this video will be already known to you, but I hope that there's a thing or two that will help you out as well in it. As usual, there are timestamps in the description box, so if you're looking for a certain topic, you will find it there. With that out of the way, let's get started with the first topic, and that's exploration. Exploration is absolutely important, and the first and most important thing that I want to talk about is you can't have too many exploration ships in general. Well, that's not really true, but as long as your ships all have missions and they're not hanging around with no mission, you most likely could use another round of them more. As a rule of thumb, I personally consider 12 to 24 exploration ships in the early game as a nice thing. It's all depending on your environment, on your cash flow, and also on your technology level in some degree. So the thing about exploration ships is they will not only explore out here. After a while, they will also come back and find new things in your home turf. How so? I want to explain to you how the exploration system in this game works first. So every thing here in the galaxy has an exploration level. So as you see here, exploration level 25, completely explored. This means there's nothing more to be discovered here. If we go into a different area here, so here this asteroid belt is defended by pirates, so we can't get there. You see here the exploration level is 1. And as we see, there's definitely something to be discovered, otherwise it would state it's completely explored. Every time your exploration ships fire off their basic survey module on an item which they scan, the survey level increases by 1. But as you see here, there is a survey maximum level of 15. So our exploration ships right now can only explore up to a level of 15. You see here a level of 25, which has come together by the mining station in the orbit. Every planet which is actively mined or colonized increases its exploration value until there's nothing more to be discovered. So this means at the point where your exploration ships get new scanners, most likely they'll fly back and scan all that stuff again, which hasn't been fully explored yet. So really, exploration ships, a dozen or two, even 3, it really depends on your circumstances, but don't be miserly here. The more you have of these, the faster you explore, the better you can select where to colonize, the more cherry picking you can do with choke points in the galaxy, with resources. There's really only benefits, except for a little bit of costs. But here's another thing if you're thinking about the costs. First off, they're really cheap. They don't cost much in terms of upkeep. And another thing, every exploration ship comes standardly with an energy collector. So energy collectors collect fuel via sunlight, so these things don't even need to be refueled, so just buy them. They're great. Now, exploration check. Let's talk about early game resources next. Early game resources is a very, very important topic all in all, because you start out small, depending on your beginning, but if you're in a pre-warp start or even in a low-level start, you'll have a tiny amount of resources, not many ships, not many stations, so everything counts early on. Simply summarized, in the early stages of the game, try to hunt fuel and construction resources first and foremost, and try to stay with just one mining station per strategical resource. So 1 station per steel. Often you can combine steel and Mabnar together. 1 station for Caslon, 1 station for silicon, and so on and so forth. Don't spam them out, and leave out the luxury resources at the beginning. Why is that so? Luxury resources only boost up the development of your colonies. At the beginning of a game, your starting colony is usually a great one. It doesn't need that much help. The other point is your fleet of civilian transporters is rather small. And At the end of the day, everything which is produced at a mining station needs to be transported away. As you see here, this mining station contains lots and lots of different materials which are just waiting for a freighter to transport them away. If you build too many stations and you don't have the necessary backup fleet of freighters behind it, at the end of the day, your resource tab here will show you extremely nice numbers. Your stockpiles are great, but you can't build anything. Why is that so? Simply because you check your spaceport and you check out here resource shortages, and you click that once, and then you can see what's really at your forges. These are the numbers that you really have. Works out for the planet as well, by the way. So here, resources on the planet. This is where you can see what resources you really have right now. This here is only a summary of the resources in your entire empire, including stuff which is just gathering dust on your mining stations. Now, therefore, I think it's a very important thing that you start out with your strategical resources and leave out the luxury resources for later. Usually that's all you need to do, and in 90% of the cases it's not even worth. It won't bring you into trouble generally, but the higher your difficulty gets and the less fortunate your starting point, you could run into trouble. Now, beyond that, there's not much more that I want to say about early game resources. We've already talked about the mining stations. One last thing, you can't control the construction of the freighters, usually. There's a trade guild background. I don't know if it's a racial feat or a technology. I haven't tried that out yet. But this is all out of your control. Therefore, the only way to control the transport of the resources and all is by controlling where the stations are. So that's my thoughts about that. The next topic I want to talk about is early game research. So while it is fine and dandy to leave the research to the AI in general, if you're new to the game, that is. If you're not new to the game, please decide for yourself. The AI does make really crappy decisions. But if you're new to the game and you still want to get the best out of your early game research, just put it onto manual for a while. And the most important technologies, in my humble opinion, early on are, first and foremostly, let me check. It's always a pain to find these here. The early warp field experiments tech is extremely important, and after that, the stable warp fields tech. This brings you the better engines, and once you have this tech, you're really able to fly outwards of your home turf. Really important. Also, this tech needs an initiation cost of Emeros crystals, necrostones, mebnor, polymer, and carbonite. So if you've spent your resources too freely, you might end up with not enough resource for that. And even worse, if you have the AI selection of technologies on, and the AI does try to rush this tech, if you have the resource. But if you don't have the resource, the AI is, oh, look, that's a fancy weapon tech, and then it ignores it further. But warp bubble generator or stable warp fields tech is so important early on. Of course, feel free to consider a stronger engine as well, but this costs you a lot of research points. After that, I personally find the technologies extremely useful, which expand your, expanded civilian ships only costs you a little bit of steel, but enables you to build small colony ships. So that's one really, really cool tech to go for early on. And last but not least, give me a sec. Mining technologies are really, really cool early on, and here we have it. Better survey scanners. As soon as I find them. Sorry, this menu is so convoluted. That's why I personally also like to go for the AI decisions, but it is a false friend. The AI decisions are usually really misleading you. So here, basic colonization. This was that's what I was looking for. Without basic colonization, your colony ships won't do anything. You need a colonization module research as well, because otherwise no colonization. And beyond that, the better survey scanners. Of course, while I'm recording this, I am blind like a mole, but you get it. Better survey scanners, I showed you, gives you better exploration results. And the last thing that I wanted to pinpoint there is storage systems give you better fuel cells, give you better cargo bays, And, you know, these are really powerful early game techs. So better your ability to colonize worlds, the ability to farm materials faster, the ability to travel further, and the ability to colonize worlds per se are, in my humble opinion, the most important things. After that, feel free to either give the control back to the AI or work yourself through this extreme wealth of technologies. It's fun. It's really fun. Once you get behind it, it's really cool to get into it. One last thing, everything you research here will be automatically retrofitted into your ships. So every new piece of technology, you don't need to worry too much about it. The AI will fit it into your empire quite decently. So that's one thing more about early game research, and we're done here. Here's the research tab. Whenever the game provides a new research location for you via exploration, by all means, build a research station there. It's totally worth it. All of these should be built ASAP, in my humble opinion, because the more capacity for research you have, the better. Your research, in the end, is limited by its funding, as you see here. If this funding is not high enough, you'll be not able to get the actual research output on the same number as the maximum potential research. So, I don't want to say much more about that. There is, of course, way much more to say about that, but I think for an early game phase, that's enough. Next topic, pirates. It's going to be a very fast topic because there's not really much to say about pirates, except for when they cross your paths, when they say hi, give me your money, you say, okay, how much? Why is that so? Of course, there are strategies that I've heard of which allow you to defend yourself decently versus pirates in the early game. You can outfit your mining stations in a way that they kill off like 90% of the pirates on their own, but since we're talking here about beginner and intermediate levels, you're most likely not going to do that. I just wanted to mention that. Pirates come with a brutal strength of ships. Often they have way more modern ship types. You start out with escort type ships, that's really the smallest available thing, and the pirates come up with frigates and even destroyers early on. So you really should try to avoid conflict with them as much as possible. While you have a protection agreement with these dudes running, they won't attack your dudes and you're safe off. My personal recommendation is only try to punch these guys if you want to have some challenge or some early game military action. Otherwise, it's almost never worth going into aggression with the pirates early game. Rather, pay off the money. It's really not that much. It's just 1,500 credits per year per pirate clan. It's easily affordable out of your early game empire. Now, next topic I want to talk about is colonization. Early game colonization is a very, very fickle thing. New colonies cost you money, and new colonies, therefore, are something which will decrease your income. But at the same time, you really need them. Without colonies, your empire won't grow. So there's two ways you can do it. First off, you can try and find those independent empires, befriend them and colonize them. The interesting part about the independent empires is that you will get a somewhat developed colony, and here you find them diplomatically. And if they are also a different species than yours, you have the advantage of grabbing a new species into your empire, and with that you have the ability to colonize other planets because, you know, different species like different biomes. So this helps your empire, but sometimes some species just don't go well with each other. Here, the Mortallon, for example, they are a perfect example for a warlike race, but independent colonies are a really good thing to expand your empire on. So I want to mention one thing here. Whenever you meet an independent empire, check out the strategy tab here. This is often checkmarked as invasion when able, and I really would like you to check that out if you really want to or not. Because if the automation is on invasion when able, it will automatically bring up an army and conquer that planet, even if you don't want any colonies at this point. The standard colonization is a lot more easy. You have to research those two technologies I was talking about. So just for repetition, basic colonization and expanded civilian ships are the key technologies for that. And after that, you can basically colonize everything around you. One thing really important about that is keep an eye on the suitability. Early on, don't colonize anything with a suitability below 20. Generally said, you can get profits out of colonies that are below suitability 20, down to the grade of suitability 15. Once you go below 15, things get really critical. But it's important because the higher the suitability, the quicker the colony will yield positive net gains for you. The lower the suitability, the longer it'll take. Sometimes it won't even happen at all. So, how to colonize properly, you might ask yourself. As much as possible and as little as... well, it's hard to say. Try not to overstrain your budget. Whenever you build a colony, assume that the colony will cost you something around 3,000 to 5,000 credits per year early on, roughly. Depending on the quality of the colony, it will bump up quicker or fast or slower, but don't colonize if your net plus is like this here. This is a bad plus. I mean, it doesn't hurt if you are in the minus for a while, but in general, try to avoid that. If you have a surplus of 4,000 to 5,000 creds per year, you're pretty well off to colonize, and you should. Really, colonize as much as possible, but don't overstrain your budget at any point. Always keep in mind that it does also pay off to keep a little bit of a extra income buffer. So, for example, leave 10,000 annual incomes for the case of a upcoming war or something like that. It really depends on your own aggressiveness and willingness to take risks in terms of colonization, but don't expand too fast. Too fast expansion can break your neck in this game. This is a big difference between Distant Worlds and other 4X titles. This is mostly due to the extremely detailed level of logistics, productions, and it easily spirals out of control. If your empire is too widespread, you don't have the necessary tech for freight transports, you will most likely kill yourself with that. Okay, that's all I wanted to say about colonization early on. So I pretty much talked about expansion a little bit, but I want to deepen the expansion topic. It's a good moment. So I already talked about how to colonize. I didn't talk about expansion though yet for real. So in general, for expansion, the same rules apply as for colonization. You want to check out the most interesting mining locations that you can grab, because mining locations are one key ingredient of your expansions. Of course, here the same rules apply. If something is too far away from your logistics network, you might get yourself into more trouble than gain. That's a bad thing about the about how things work. Another thing about expansion in general, don't expand past the borders of an AI empire, because they will consider that as one of the biggest ways to piss them off that you can do in the game, because you basically tell them, guys, I don't respect your borders at all. You're not even there for me. And most of the time that resulted in a war declaration for me. Now, there's not much more to say about the early game expansion except for colonize and expand as hard as you can without overstraining your income. This is something you need to learn by experience, because I can't put up better rules of thumb than these. So the next thing I want to talk about is military. Military is a cool thing in this game because military ships don't cost you too much. They cost you an investment early on. You build military ships on your stations here, and you can construct them here, and there you can just spam them out. My personal experience was that my AI advisors didn't build enough ships for my personal taste. If you check out here the annual expenses your ship and base maintenance is your personal guideline about how much you want to build. A couple of things that I want to mention here, which personally surprised me. First off, most of your military ships won't be eating up much fuel. So if you see a negative income of Caslon here, which is your early game fuel, don't worry. First off, this number is, according to experienced players, most of the time wrong. And the other part is 90% of the fuel will be used by the private economy because, you know, those freighters need fuel. And the rest, basically, I don't know if these numbers are exact, but the military can use the rest of the 10% as a figure of speech, of course. What I want to say there is most military ships really don't have a high cost beyond the annual maintenance expenses. The hidden costs of a high fleet, though, are that retrofitting costs you a lot of resource, but most of the time you're perfectly fine with that. So when you check out your ships here, an escort doesn't offer much, but it does only cost you 108 credits per year, considering that amount of income we have right now. So if you don't want to expand via colonization anymore, and you see your income growing and growing and growing, consider buying some military ships. It's never bad, because this is directly a sign for militaristic AI players that they better look for an easier victim. And the other thing is there's space monsters out there that will disrupt your logistics chains quite severely, so there's really a good reason to have some extra military, and I personally found that most of the time they weren't that costly. Just don't overdo it, and if you ever realize that you might have overdone it, you can also easily just scrap these ships by retiring them. So if you have any trouble with that, no problem. Last things about military that I wanted to talk about is the automation settings here are pretty okay-ish. The military attacks are on suggest and execute on my personal favors, but one thing I really like to do is to have 1 or 2 fleets which I control manually, because you can put your fleets on manual control, while the other fleets are all controlled by the AI. Pretty spiffy thing, because I personally find that the AI reacts a little bit too sluggish to certain things happening. For example, invasion fleets that try to conquer your planets. More often than not, the AI had not the response that not the quick enough response. When that happens, you want to send a fleet immediately. The AI doesn't necessarily do that, so you can help yourself with those tricks. Of course, military, much more to say. Shipbuilding, editor, and whatnot, tons of things, but for a beginner and intermediate player with these things, you should be able to tackle yourself through the easy and normal difficulties quite decently. The last thing I want to talk about is diplomacy, but we're going to head over to a different save file for that. There we go. Here we got an empire which already has a couple of things going on and a couple of people we can do diplomacy with. So your diplomacy menu is something that I want to talk about as well. So first off, diplomacy with your neighbors. It all depends on which race you play, what's your game plan, and you know, basically, if you're a peaceful species, you might want to be more towards trade treaties and all. And if you're a warfaring species, you want to topple over the weak and conquer them. But that's not what I want to talk about. Really important here, just like with the independent races, there is an automatic strategy defined, and like in my personal opinion, 90% of the time it sucks. So check out your neighbors and select for yourself what kind of strategy you want to have with these. The AI will then automatically try to do these things. So it's like strategy can be automatically decided or by yourself. And my experience is that the AI does horrible decisions in that regard. So here, for example, it made a war with somebody. The AI built a war with a faction that I'd actually like to have as a trade partner, and all in all here undermining, whereas I would rather conquer these Mortalen. So really check out what you want to do with these guys by yourself. 90% of the time the AI does really crappy decisions. Same goes for the independent colonies. I personally don't know why we can either go for diplomacy or invasion. I hate the fact that there's no leave them alone and just leave them alone. But, you know, this way, when you go for diplomacy leading to peaceful colonization, you will always be asked whether or not you want to give gifts to these people and whether or not you want to colonize these planets. So if you just ignore these pop-ups adamantly enough, you will not have any unwanted colonies. By the way, pop-ups, because we're already at the end of the video, because there's not much more I want to say about diplomacy, except for one thing. Pop-ups can wait. To befriend yourself with AI empires is really, really easy. You just send them, you just pelt them with money. There is a little bit of a, you know, I don't like it too much, but you can't just toss money on them until they are your friends. 90% of the time this works out quite decently, unless it is a species which will go for war anyways, whether they like you or not. Some species are just whack like that, but if you want to be friends with any other AI empire, just toss money at them, because money makes friends. And once you have tossed enough money at them, all the other treaties will unlock shortly after. This is a very simplified version of diplomacy in this game, but it'll surely help you through the early game stage. And if you want to go for more, check out the diplomacy screen here, and most importantly, also check out the intelligence mission screen, because here you can really configure a lot about your diplomacy as well, especially how your spies work. If this is overwhelming to you, just leave it at the standard settings. They aren't super bad, but as all standard settings, they aren't too brilliant either. Now, I hope this video was a helpful one for you. All the information here is, like I said, tailored for beginners and intermediate players. So if you want to add something, or if you found a mistake on my side, feel free to drop a comment there, because this game, like I said, is freaking vast, and I hope I have understood everything correctly. So enjoy yourselves with that one. Feel also free to add in other tips and tricks for the early game stages, because, you know, this is no competition. I'd love to have this as a cooperation between players where we share our early game strats in the comment section. With that said, leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed and consider subscribing to my channel. There's daily content coming up from my side. I'd be glad to have you. Also, in the description box below, you will find a link to my Twitch channel where I stream quite regularly, almost daily. So, have a good one, and see you soon, I hope. Bye-bye.